In this second episode of the introductory video series on the existential implications of the question of the nature of reality, the specific topic will be about the question of free will. We as humans have a deep intuition and feeling that we decide and choose for ourselves, and that our actions are entirely of our own volition. While there might be external demands placed on me, ultimately I myself have the final say in the choices that I make. I could have done something else, something completely different than what I did. That's the traditional notion of free will. However, as noted in the previous episode, the most widespread view about reality today, in the West at least, is the thesis of physicalism. The idea that the only thing that exists independently is the physical, and that consciousness of the intangible aspects of the mind are merely a product of what occurs physically within the brain. And if this thesis is accepted as true, it's very hard to maintain the idea of free will in a traditional sense. Why is this? Because the laws of nature govern the way the physical world operates. Meaning, for example, that if I hold an object, like this book, and I let it go, it will fall onto the table. Every time this process is repeated. That's a law of nature. In this case, gravity. Gravity intervenes when I let go of the book and makes it fall in a certain way. Even before I let go, gravity has already determined exactly how the book will drop. The entire physical world operates like this. That's how and why the natural sciences work. They explore these laws of nature by observing the way the physical world operates. So, if this is the case for the entire physical world, then that means that this is also the case for what happens in my brain as well. Ultimately, meaning that what happens in my brain is determined. Arguably, at the level of quantum mechanics, there are some things that are a bit different. But at the level of observable experience, the physical world operates in a deterministic way. It's determined. Everything is determined by the laws of nature. It's all cause and effect. So, if one takes a physicalist point of view, what happens in my brain is determined by physical laws. This means that since the tangible and physical processes that occur within the brain are what generate consciousness, then what happens in my consciousness, what I think, what I will, etc., is fundamentally also determined by these laws of nature. So this means that what occurs within my consciousness is predetermined, not by some God, but by the laws of nature. Consequently, this means that it is already determined now what I will do tomorrow at 5 o'clock. Even if I have the feeling or notion that I have a choice in the matter, I feel like I can do something differently than what I'm actually going to do. But in reality, if one accepts the physicalist point of view, it is all determined. From a physicalistic standpoint, we have no free will. It's merely an illusion. This has some serious implications, for example, when it comes to the idea of personal responsibility. The whole premise of personal responsibility is that I have a choice in my actions. My freedom to have chosen to do something else is what makes me responsible for the actions I did in fact choose. My choices are my own. But if my actions are predetermined, and there's no possibility whatsoever that I could have acted differently, then it would be impossible for me to be accountable for any action. I wouldn't really be responsible for what I did. It would just be the laws of nature that govern everything that made me do it, so to speak. So based on this, it isn't rational to punish people for doing something wrong, for example. The entire idea behind punishment, behind sending a person to prison, for example, is that, well, you broke a known and established societal law, and you shouldn't have. But since you did it anyway, it's justified to send you to prison. But if you could not have acted in any other way than you did, it was impossible in a strict sense, then because of this, it's very hard to maintain a notion of justice. If people are punished for doing what they do, and it's utterly impossible for them to do anything else than what they do, then it doesn't seem very just to punish them. So, a physicalistic worldview is very hard to reconcile with the idea of free will as it is traditionally understood. But even if one doesn't accept a physicalistic worldview, there still seems to be limits on what one is able to will or can will. For example, if I find philosophy interesting, I will read books concerning philosophy or make videos like this one. If I didn't find philosophy interesting, however, I would prefer doing something else. I try to do what I find interesting, what I like or what I want. So I have a certain spectrum of what I want, what I can will, what I'm able to will. But what I want or what I will is limited by my interests, my values, my goals, my physiology, and so on. There are a lot of reasons, a lot of things that cause me to want this or that. And when I want this or that, then I try to act in ways that fulfill my goals of achieving it. If I really like and want something, I'll try to do it. If I really dislike something, I don't want to do it. I can't will it in the deepest sense. So it looks like the more insight we achieve into not only physics, but biology, history, psychology, sociology, etc., the less likely it is that the traditional conception of free will is true. It does not seem to be the case that we can freely will anything. Rather, there are limits on what we can will. I can only will to do what is within a certain personal spectrum, determined by biological factors, psychological factors, historical factors, etc. So even if one doesn't subscribe to physicalism, it seems reasonable to conclude that there are limits on what a person can will and how a person can act. In other words, both from a physicalistic perspective and from a non-physicalistic point of view, we find ourselves concluding, it seems, that we do not have free will in the traditional sense. And this has some interesting ethical implications. Because if a person is limited in what he or she can willingly choose to do, then it doesn't make much sense to expect that person to act in any way outside of what he or she is limited to. If I really understand that this is the case, that this is impossible for a person to act in certain ways, even if I might like them to act in those ways, then it's easier for me to tolerate the behavior of the person, or even to forgive the person for doing something directed against me that I don't like. That doesn't mean that I should tolerate being bullied or that I shouldn't stand up for do what I think is right. It just means that those impulses of resentment or hatred or revenge are easier to transcend. It's easier to let go of negative feelings about the negative actions of others. So this points towards an ethics of tolerance and perhaps even forgiveness. This argument was made, in fact, by Baruch Spinoza, an influential 17th century philosopher who's been called the Prince of Philosophers. He subscribed to strict determinism, not on physicalist grounds, but because he believed that the physical and the mental are two sides of the same coin, different aspects of the same fundamental reality. Thus, just like a contemporary science-minded physicalist, Spinoza believed that there are limits on what a person can will. But even if one doesn't accept Spinoza's metaphysics, or indeed physicalism, it still seems to be the case that there are some limits on what a person can will. And thus, it's not rational to expect a person to act in a way that falls outside their own limit. To expect a person to will something he or she cannot will, even if that person is acting in a way that I don't like or believe is morally wrong. Spinoza would argue that if I get this, if I understand this, if I possess this insight, then it's much easier for me to be an altruistic person, kind person, a helpful person towards all people, and that this attitude is crucial to achieving a happy life. This would be perhaps the key thing to do if I wanted to live a happier life. And most people do that. Interestingly, this matches the results of modern psychological studies that are done on happiness today. Correlation is found between being an altruistic person and non-egoistic person, caring person, a kind person, helpful person, and having or maintaining a happier life. So that's a very interesting correlation. And it's additionally interesting that it's backed up by philosophical arguments based on the problem of free will. In the next episode, the topic will be the question of continued existence of consciousness or life after death, which turns out to be a question much more open than what is usually assumed. Thanks.